What's up guys, today I am heading to London from New York's John F Kennedy International Airport with British Airways in economy class, or otherwise known as World Traveller. We're on the air train service which linked New York to the terminal buildings here at JFK Airport and takes you around all of the terminals to British Airways Terminal 7. Once you're off the air train, it's just a very short walk across the road to the terminal. Now, Terminal 7 at JFK is the only airport terminal in the US operated by a foreign carrier on US soil. But once you're inside the terminal, it's not actually that great, to be honest. It's a little bit dark and very low ceilings, just like the old terminals used to be at Heathrow before they got rebuilt. I headed to the TSA checkpoint here at JFK and it wasn't actually that busy. That's probably because it was really early in the morning here and most flights heading eastbound across the Atlantic leave the US in the evening to get into Europe in the morning. Well, this is one of the few exceptions to that rule, and it's British Airways morning departure that leaves at 7 in the morning and gets into Heathrow at 7 o'clock in the evening. Security cleared with relative ease, I headed through to the duty-free shop to grab some bargains ahead of my flight back to Europe. This is definitely one of the perks of this job, and I have to say that our drinks cabinet at home is never short of weird and wonderful alcohol from around the world. BA are working on a massive renovation of Terminal 7 at the moment, so there is just building work everywhere you walk within this building. While I expect it'll be pretty nice when it's complete, it doesn't do much to add to the dark and dingy atmosphere generally found in Terminal 7. And here is the Queen of the Skies that's going to be taking me across the pond today. You can't deny that even at 20 years old, this aircraft looks as beautiful now as the day it was delivered, well, from the outside at least. As we got closer to departure, the gate area started filling up in what can only be described as disorganised chaos. Nobody knew where they had to go, there were no forms of queue set up or anything like that. It was just every single passenger in a really small space and was very claustrophobic actually. I don't think it helped that the PA system wasn't working either, and all of the boarding announcements were done by a woman shouting at all the passengers across the gate area. Finally, my boarding group was called and I could actually make my way out of this terminal down the jet bridge towards the Boeing 747. Any duty-free purchases are collected as you walk down the jet bridge to the plane to make sure that you're not able to drink them in the terminal building. And finally, I was able to board my very first ever British Airways Boeing 747. British Airways have a massive business class or Club World cabin as they call it on the Boeing 747. It includes not only these seats downstairs, but there's also a load of seats upstairs in Club World 2, which is where I'll be sitting later on this year when I fly in Club World on the BA 747. For today though, I made my way through the premium economy cabin, or World Traveller Plus as they call it, which is essentially just economy with a little extra legroom, to cattle class at the back, which is where I would be crammed for today's flight over to London. BA have recently renovated all of the Boeing 747s with a really nice cabin. There's mood lighting and everything, but there is no mistaking that this aircraft is a very old aircraft and is still over 20 years old. And after all, economy is economy regardless of what airline you fly. My seat today was 45A, which would normally give you quite a good view across the back of the wing. However, that is if the window is not scratched as it was on this flight. I have to say that this window was one of the most badly scratched windows I've ever had on a flight, and I've even flown on Emirates 777s before. This was terrible. BA's safety video is pretty hubris, or at least it is the first few times you see it. It does tend to get a little bit dry after a while. It features quite a few British celebrities, all in aid of Comic Relief, which is a British charity. And that was it, my last sight of the USA for this trip, as we entered the really low cloud and emerged a few minutes later on top of it. Let's take a quick look at the route that we flew today. And it was a pretty standard routing for our flight. From the east coast to the UK, we headed up over Nova Scotia, over Newfoundland, straight across the Atlantic, coasting in over Southern Ireland, before crossing the south of Wales, over Bristol, and then a beautiful descent and landing into London Heathrow. Flight time today was 6 hours and 1 minute from takeoff to touchdown at an altitude of 37,000 feet. Once we were above the clouds into brighter weather, the state of the window really became apparent. It was absolutely atrocious. It wasn't like this was a one-off either. Every single window on the lower deck of this aircraft that I saw had exactly the same scratching on it. It was pretty disappointing, to be honest, that the window was quite so badly scratched. I know it's not the end of the world, but it really does give quite a poor impression to all the window seat passengers when they can't see a thing out of the window due to the scratches. Not long after takeoff, the cabin crew came around with their breakfast service. I opted for the full English breakfast after a few days in the US. I was looking forward to seeing how a British Airways full English breakfast was done. Yeah. To be honest, it doesn't look that appetising. I don't know whether it's just because I was hungry at this point and needed coffee and food and everything, but it actually didn't taste too bad. The airshow map on the 747 is actually quite modern, and to be honest I found it a lot easier to use than on the newer Airbus A380 I had on the way over. For a 20-year-old aircraft, the in-flight entertainment system is surprisingly modern. I think they've had it refitted. It has hundreds of movies, TV shows, music albums, all sorts of things to keep you occupied as you travel around the world on these aircraft. Kids have their own section too, where they can watch a variety of Disney movies and things like that. And also catch up with all the news from the BBC with their World News Service. I'm not quite sure whether this is completely live or whether it's just loaded into the system before the flight leaves, but it's really cool to be able to catch up with the news as you make your way halfway across the Atlantic. A couple of hours before landing, there is a light snack service, and on this flight it consisted of a cream cheese filled pretzel. The crew were pretty good at bringing around a steady supply of snacks, drinks and everything else that you could want to keep you occupied. Compared to the terrible weather that we'd left behind in New York, the weather in Western Europe was much better. We got some fantastic views across the south of Ireland, the Irish Sea, South Wales and Bristol as we headed across to London Heathrow. So we touched down on schedule at London Heathrow at 7 o'clock in the evening local time. It felt really strange but also really cool to actually be arriving into Heathrow on the same day that we left from New York. It's not very often that you get daytime flights heading east, and this was a really good opportunity to actually fly from the US to the UK in broad daylight. I know that it uses up a day of time, but I really do wish that more airlines would do these morning departures from the States heading over to Europe, getting into Europe in the evening. It makes it so much easier. You can get off the plane and have a full night's sleep before whatever you're doing the next day. Arriving into the UK at the UK border is actually really straightforward. As long as you have an e-passport, you can just head straight to the e-passport gate, pop your passport on the reader and you're straight through in less than 30 seconds. It's really, really handy. Within 10 minutes of stepping off the aircraft, I was here landside at Heathrow Terminal 5. Heathrow really is an efficient airport to fly through these days, especially if you go through Terminal 5 or Terminal 2. From here I headed to the pod parking section, which would take me on a little self-driving pod right the way through to the business parking just north of Terminal 5. It's really handy to use. You can get a pod on demand, you press the button and here comes the pod. Then it's just a 5-minute journey which takes you right from the terminal right into the centre of the car park to get your car back home. I mean, it's pretty expensive parking wise, but you can't beat the convenience really. So here, with the sun going down, I got off the pod and walked about 10 metres to my parked car in order to drive back home. It really was cool being able to get an early morning flight out of the US, fly all the way back to the UK and then just be home in time for bed. British Airways were fantastic, as always in economy class. The aircraft was a little bit tired and the scratch window really did put me off. However, the cabin crew were fantastic, so the meal services were not too bad. The in-flight entertainment on the 747 is still pretty good. Thanks very much for watching this trip report. Take care and I'll see you next time here on In-Flight Video.